Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to our Masterclass webinar. Um, just to introduce ourselves, I'm Adam. I'm Consulting Director at Vaimo Western Europe.
Good
Yeah.
afternoon, everyone. Good morning. My name is PJ Otzi. I am co-founder of Vaimo and I serve as Chief Creative Officer. Happy to see you.
Good afternoon. Good morning. I'm Rafaela, Product Marketing Manager at Contentful. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. And the numbers are going up. That's great. Loads of people online. It's a pleasure to talk to you. If you have any questions, there is a questions tab. We'll be answering them at the end. But in the meantime, what we're going to cover today is how AI is transforming how brands are discovered, chosen, and grown, but also how multi-brand businesses need to adapt to that situation. The first thing we're going to cover is the shift in consumer behavior that we see. Broadly speaking, LLM search means that brand strategy is now fundamental and essential to discoverability. This is especially problematic for multi-brand enterprises and represents for them both a challenge and an opportunity. So we're going to come back to that and cover it off in detail in a second. But broadly speaking, the way people search for products is changing. It used to be transactional, so people would go from search engine through to product listing page, product detail page, and checkout, through to one which is much more conversational. If I'm searching for an iPad, for example, within ChatGPT, I can get a much more comprehensive review of the range of products that are available within there than I can get on Apple's website. And beyond that, I can get an answer that is tailored to me because it knows that I like to do a load of slides. It knows that I go on holiday with my family, so I watch videos. And it knows that my son is into music, so he plays with Logic. So I can get a really good tailored answer to what is the best iPad for me. So we've gone from a world where visibility and placement were the priorities to one where relevance and meaning are much more important. And this isn't something we can ignore. These tools are being embedded in the pockets and handsets of millions of people globally. Amazon are embedding it within their app in the US so that you will be able to search products from across the web, not just from Amazon's catalog. Beyond that, the journeys that you go on will be able to be completed within the LLM itself. So chats will turn into checkouts without you even hitting the website itself. This means, Rafaela.
Yeah, sure. So I think what we're talking here is about relevance and meaning. And it's impossible to not think about the current noise that AI is also backlashing. So that's a consequence of now how brands are scaling their content production through AI. So we see a very high increase in the volume of content, but also more content is not always equals better content, right? Differentiation is becoming very key and very hard to achieve these days. And at Contentful, the signals that we are getting from customers, from partners, from industry is that with AI mediating this search, the discovery ends even before prospects enter in the funnel, most of the cases. And that leads also to a click-through rate declination, which means that less people are actually landing on the website. And whenever there is a perception that the content is AI made, the trust is being impacted. So yes, AI can generate content that seems more polished, but also is more emotionally flat. And the audiences can tell it, they can feel it, and then trust and engagement are really impacted by it. So that's a little bit of the vicious cycle that we are at the moment noticing and what we are internally calling at the great content collapse. So it's this high volume of low quality AI generated content that leads to the drop in engagement and trust. In this context, two things become key. That is what we are going to surface as well. Personalization and geo readiness. For brands to have impact, they need now to be consistent. They need to be AI readable, meaning that their relevance will depend on how well their identity translates into the data that the engines and LLMs can interpret these days.
All right, so I'm sure many of you are thinking, why on earth are we talking about this again? I'm sure you've all heard this exact story or variations of it. AI traffic, LLM conversations, so forth and so on. And trust us, we're going to get there. I think that's important that we kind of frame this, because this is the underlying forces behind one of the big shifts that we're just talking about, and then how to deal with that. But I just want to start with what I think is the most important question in this entire masterclass, at least one of them. And it's this one. When your customers describe themselves, describe their needs, their preferences, and their context, how does your brand actually show up? If it even does it show up at all? Because what's changing here is how discovery works. This is no longer about keywords, ranking, or placement. It is actually about whether your brand makes sense inside a conversation. And that's why this is not even a marketing question anymore. It's a discoverability question. If an AI understands the customer better than your website does, and it increasingly will, most definitely, then the only brands that show up are the ones that can be understood. Right? That's the key point here. So before we go any further, I'm genuinely curious, and this is a real question, and we're going to do a small poll here. How many of you have actually tried, as a brand owner, marketer, or digital leader, to AI yourself? Have you gone into ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, or whatever you want to use, and ask questions as if you were your customer? Things like, what brand should I choose? What's the difference between, brand A and option B? Which one would fit someone like me? So go ahead and answer here, and we're going to see the answers or the results coming in. And again, this is not to test the tool, but to actually see yourself. For yourself, you show up, just as we're Googling ourselves and hoping that we're turn up and among the first 10 blue links, right? We'll see how it shakes out. Are we able to get this the results on screen somehow here, or is it the sidebar?
It's in the sidebar, I think.
Yeah. So it looks like we've got a bit of a 50-50 situation here. Quite surprising. A lot of us haven't. I'm sure everybody's been dabbling with these tools, but it's about time to start AI ourselves, just as we're Googling yourself, just to get a feel for, are we even in the mix here? So this is actually what we see a lot there among our clients. A lot of brands talk about AI, but very few have actually looked at themselves through this very specific lens. And this gap is exactly what today is about. All right. So here's an important part, though, and this is where I want to slow things down for a little moment. So despite everything we've said about AI, discovering conversations, the fundamentals of why people choose brands, those haven't changed. We strongly believe that customers still choose brands based on trust, based on style, identity, values, emotional connection, and belief in quality, right? So if that hasn't changed, why do brands suddenly matter more than ever? Because that's another thing that we believe in. We're Vaimo and Contentful as well. I know we're talking about the renaissance of brands. Brands matter more than ever. And there's two reasons, at least to me, why that is happening. First, brands are almost like cultural shortcuts. We think about them constantly, often without even realizing. They're heuristics, mental models, and they help us decide faster. Number two, secondly, brands are one of the strongest proxies we have for preferences or values. So when an AI tries to recommend something, it doesn't start with products, it starts with the users, the people. And brands are one of the cleanest ways to translate who someone is into what might actually fit them. So brands, I think, are not losing their relevance. It's actually the opposite. The opposite. What's changing is the paths to finding them. That's completely new. And that leads us to the opportunity here. Adam?
So the opportunity here for multi-brand businesses is this. If we take a client of ours like Push has a number of brands, many of which target the same audience. So for example, By Radio, Jean Paul Gaultier, Penhaligon's, and L'Artisan Parfumier, amongst others, all target a fragrance customer. And understandably, their maisons have a very important say in the way their e-commerce experience is manifested. Byredo looks clean, distinct, Swedish, Scandi, modern. L'Artisan Parfumier evokes the craft of the people who have made each fragrance and tells their story in great detail. Jean-Paul Gaultier expresses the juxtaposition of fashion and fragrance right the way through the site. And understandably, Penhaligon's evokes tradition, an old fragrance house. These four sit in as showcases for the brands and depth of the brands, but it's hard for us to understand how they might compare. What PJ is going to show you now is how that can manifest within an LLM and how that changes.
Yeah, let's make things a little bit more concrete. I'm sure you've all done the same thing or variants thereof. So this is me in a somewhat normal interaction, a conversation with my always on super intelligent assistant. I might be thinking about, what perfume should I get next? So what's important here is not the actual recommendation. What's important here is the answer I'm getting. And the thing here is the answer is not specific, or it is extremely specific. It's not generic. The system, the AI, already knows things about me. It has my graph. It knows what brands I've referenced before. It knows patterns in my preferences. It knows context, lifestyle, taste, and even how I would describe myself. So the answer I get here, I think we have a few variations of this exact thing. It's unique to me. And that's the shift here. Discovery is no longer about showing the same message to everyone. It's about being interpretable at the moment someone explains who they are. That's the shift here. So now behind the scenes of this conversation, something very different is happening compared to classic search. AI is not matching keywords. AI is modeling intent. It is extracting preferences. It is inferring values. It is trying to understand identity. And when it does, and then it does something crucial. It matches that identity to brand meaning. So this is no longer a retrieval problem. It is actually a translation problem. AI isn't just retrieving products. It's connecting stories about the user or person, and stories about the brand. So this is where it might get a bit uncomfortable, because in this type of discovery, brands don't compete the way they used to. And in this scenario, there are only three outcomes. You want to be in the middle. That's where you're still alive. You want to be discovered because the AI understands you. On the left, on the distorted side, you're misrepresented because the AI fills in the gap for you. It hallucinates or does something wrong. On the right side, you're just disappearing. You're invisible because the AI can't explain you at all, or doesn't think you relate to the actual conversation. So there's no neutral outcome here. If your brand meaning isn't clear, consistent, and available, the conversation simply moves on without you. Which leads us to the main point here. Storytelling is no longer a layer that you add at the end. Storytelling is infrastructure, because this is the material AI learns from, what it trains on: your content, your tone of voice, your product narratives, your positioning, your consistency over time. And if this infrastructure is weak or fragmented, AI cannot represent you correctly, no matter how good your products are. So this is why discovery has, again, become a design problem, not a channel problem. All right? So I'm going to finish up here this section with some good news. This is not bad news for brands. It's actually an opportunity. For the first time in a long time, relevance matters more than the reach. Meaning matters more than placement. And clarity matters more than spend. Brands that know who they are and can express it clearly are going to be disproportionately rewarded in this new world. Right? That's the good news. So this shift also creates a new tension, because while customers experience all of this as seamless and simple, at least to what they can see, most organizations are not built to support it, especially multi-brand organizations. And we're going to get to that. And that's where we are moving now with Adam.
So what stops most clients getting to the right answer here. Their customers come to the sites with one simple question to answer, which is, does this brand fit me? And do the products of that brand really suit what I would need? But that customer reality meets with internal complexity within the business. Many of our clients have situations like this, where multiple brand teams and multiple brand narratives sit across different data silos across the business that make it challenging to create more relevant experiences, and different combinations of architecture. Some of that has been consolidated into composable stacks. Some of it, because of acquisitions or legacies, is more fragmented. And over the top of that, you have cost control, governance, and management, all of which are trying to kind of organize everything and actually distract people from creating great user experiences. What happens is this: organizations don't just design products, they encode their internal structure onto them. And websites and across e-commerce, that is represented. The fragmentation exists. Internal fragmentation leads to competing information and external confusion, both with users and with LLMs.
Yeah, we also see this internal fragmentation being reflected in actually how AI adoption is going. And it's what we are calling now a gap between optimism and execution. So Contentful partnered with Atlantic Insights, and we had a study to understand how marketing leaders are actually experiencing this AI adoption. And what we found is that actually, as 96% of CMOs consider a priority and investments follow with 65%, there's a bigger gap when we look at outcomes. So only 18% have managed to actually adopt AI in a way that reduces the dependencies on other teams. And this gap reveals that they are adopting, but they are not seeing yet this structure or organizational impact that they're expecting. And the way that organizations are designed, their workflows, the data, the content structures, they will impact on effectiveness of AI. Because as it was already mentioned, it doesn't understand org charts or brand ownership. It will basically scan across and create their own judgment based on how consistent the information is found and the brand is perceived. And when the systems are fragmented across different platforms, data warehouses, brand teams, this fragmentation will basically, like a mirror, reflect back. And what we are seeing is that our most successful customers, they are actually treating AI more as an accelerator, not so much as an author. So we are back to this relevance, to importance of meaning. Investing in systems that will create some standards of how work happens, it has been helpful as well, and creating more original narratives so that engines can actually verify and audiences as well. So this all is getting into the AI readable aspect that we are mentioning. And when we see here, this is a diagram that shows how brand strategy can be executed with Contentful. And that's also where this GO is at the moment happening. So the systems will always optimize for a structure that they can understand and that they can reuse. And Contentful is really in between this layer. It's connecting content, it's connecting with data, and bringing together into the lead and the step of the content model. Why content model is important? Because this makes brand meaning explicitly. So what a product is, who is it for, how it differs from another brand or variant, what's global versus what's local, especially in the context of multi-brand. So that structure, when it's consistent, AI will be able to recognize the patterns, verify information across the sources, and summarize brands more accurately in the geo context. Reusability, as I mentioned, is also a key part. So when we have the same structure that is being fed into different channels, this means that AI will be able to spot the coherent story and not the conflicting versions. And then it will mirror, again, consistency and not confusion. And a third aspect is governance that also plays a big role here. So by letting the teams define what can be reused, this will basically say or tell LLMs what stays consistent and reduce the contradictions. So that's how now Contentful support designing a system or structuring organization in a way that AI will keep seeing the same clear signals and reflecting the signals no matter what region, what ownership, or what channel we are talking about.
Thanks, Rafael.
All right, let me try to beat Rafaela's system diagram with an even wilder table or wall of text here. Before we go any further, I want us to align on something fundamental, because when we're talking about multi-brand strategy, when we say multi-brand strategy, we make it sound like it is one thing, and it is definitely not. What we're looking at here is some sort of illustration, because there's to visualize that there are fundamentally different ways to structure and operate a portfolio of brands, and they behave very, very differently to the consumers and internally, but also in a world of AI-driven discovery. At one end, to the left here, we've got the branded house type of setups. These are the Sonys, the Samsungs, or the Googles. One master brand outshining everything else, maximum leverage of that brand, 100% consistency across everything. It's very easy, but only a few behemoth type companies are in this end of the spectrum. On the other end, the right-hand side, you have a classic house of brands goal. Independent identities, independent storytelling, very little visible connection. This is where we find the luxury brands, Louis Vuitton groups, the Richemonts, the Kerings, the Puig group, so forth and so on. In between, we have a couple of variations. We start from the left here, the sub-brands or retailer-led brands. These are, Virgin is a good example. They're running multiple businesses and multiple lines or even channels, if you will. They have a shared stack most of the time. The storytelling is led by one brand or led by the retailer, and the retailer owns all the data. It's pretty clean in that sense, and it's most often about margin and control. In the middle is where what we call endorsed brands. We actually flip this around. Marriott is a good example. Courtyard by Marriott, or Residence Inn in the hotel space, where you have a visible parent that is endorsing or shining the trust light on every single independent brand here. Parent led with brand flavor is what we call it. So, and then on the fourth column here, what we call the federated brands or sibling brands that are clearly related, but they don't have a real parent. This is where you find the likes of Nike, at least if you go to the Nike in the US, on Nike.com, you're one click away to from switching to Jordan or to Converse. Or also in the US, you look at Gap, you're one click away from Banana Republic, from Old Navy or Athleta, for example. There are many other examples in the world of cycling with Trek and Bontrager and Electra, snowboarding, LiveTech, GNU, Burton, Anon, many other examples. We call them federated. So what's important here, I think, is not memorizing these models. What matters here is trying to understand the trade-offs. I think most of you are trying to managing a balancing act where we choose between control versus autonomy, and efficiency versus flexibility, and centralized meaning versus local relevance. And there's no universally right model, but there's definitely a right model for what you're trying to achieve. And the last thing here before leaving this wall of text is the AI actually cares about these slight differences. The AI does not treat these models equally. Okay, so let's see here. So what we actually see when we look at our own clients, it is actually this. Many of clients, they say, warehouse of brands, but they operate as something different. Many of our clients, or I'm guessing many of you, you want cross-brand optimization. You want to leverage the fact you're housing or operating multiple brands. Your tech stack is a mishmash. You maybe have one PIM or many PIM, got a number of DAMs, a number of CMSs or CRM systems, number of storefront and e-commerce web front, e-commerce platforms, right? You share customers because if you look at the case of Push Group, for example, they know that the Paco Rabanne or Jean Paul Gaultier customer also is relevant for Burrito, but there's no way of sharing that data between them. And another thing we see, everybody's talking about AI and think it's really important, as we saw earlier in the numbers, but it's really impossible to train for it. So that's what we see most of the time. And I want to make it practical here with a last poll.
Oh.
Sorry, one slide before that.
Yeah.
Yes, the leaders. What we try to teach and I guess preach with our clients, when we look at leaders who are doing as well, and when we're trying to help our clients do it well, they're not necessarily simpler. It's about clarity. Our clients and leaders in this space, we try to help them to make explicit decisions about which brands stand alone, which brands should connect, and which relationships should be visible to the customer and what should be invisible to the customer. To separate expression, because that's what brands want. Like Burrito does not want to have anything to do with Charlotte Tilbury or Paco Rabanne, but the intelligence under the hood is where they want to connect and leverage the scale here. So each brand keeps its voice, its identity, its story, but this behind the scenes, the data and learning, that's when we are orchestrating things. So this is exactly what we mean when we say a portfolio becomes a network, and that's what you need to orchestrate. You as an organization becomes more of an orchestrator for this. And now to the poll. So looking at all these models, this is the question, just going to get a temperature here. Where do you think you belong mostly today? Not where you want to be, or not what it says in your strategy deck, but where you actually think you are today, where you actually think you operate. Let's see. Looking at the results here. So pretty much what we said earlier. Branded House of Brands are look to be 30% each, and then we've got endorsed brands on 19%, federated on 14, and sub or retailer brands on 5. So an even split between Branded House and House of Brands, and then endorsed, federated, and sub/retailer. All right, so a follow-up question you might think about is like, is it deliberate? Did you decisively do something to end up here, or did it just happen, right? What we see is that most organizations, they don't really answer this question until AI forces the issue a little bit. So I'll finish with this in this piece, where I think it gets a bit interesting, because one of the things that AI, one of the areas where AI is different in consuming the internet from normal human, is that AI is not limited to a single website. AI doesn't look at a website in isolation one at a time, brand A first, and then brand B, and then brand C, and when we get to brand D, has forgotten about brand A. That doesn't really happen. AI, simplified, is consuming the entire internet, all the sites, all the brands, all the signals at the same time. And it can understand and see the connections between parent companies, sibling brands, shared values, shared audiences maybe. And it does this whether you like it or not. So this is the opportunity here. It's actually to leverage those relationships if you want to, if you can. The opportunities to design your brand stories deliberately, so to let the right connections seep through, so that when an AI suggests, compares, or recommends brands, it does so in a way that reflects how you want your portfolio to work. For example, if you're a fragrance brand, if you know that 2 brands are most often resonating really well with a given audience, you might come up with stories on each site or on the umbrella company site to connect those 2 brands a little bit more than maybe others in your portfolio. So this is exactly why we have a set of new rules that we're going to get to, because AI sees the whole system, and it's about clarity beating control all the time.
So what are those rules? There are 5. The first, we believe, is that orchestration beats management. You should start with a strategy. Create clarity and differentiation through simple separation and disambiguation of your brands. Position each differently through meaning, defining content, relevance, and experience. And that's how you can build a platform from which you can scale personalization. You can support AI discovery and grow portfolios without a degree of chaos. The second rule is to enter the conversation. If you're not in that conversation, you don't exist. But having an ambition to be in it is a challenge for many people today. Your brand has to be designed and understood and recommended by AI. Number 3 is to make the storytelling that comes from that conversation an infrastructure. It will understand your brand from content, tone, product positioning, and customer signals. If there is inconsistent storytelling in each of your brands and across your brands, and if that storytelling is shallow, AI cannot represent you correctly. Storytelling is no longer marketing, it is infrastructure. Rule 4 is to network your portfolio, to behave like a group business. Brands can't operate in isolation and silos. Data flows need to go across brands, customer insights should be shared, technology has to be orchestrated, and personalization coordinated. From an AI perspective, and from a customer perspective, each brand remains distinct, identity can remain clear, and experience can feel intentional, but there is separation in expression, but unity in the intelligence that goes behind that and the way you measure success within that. Then finally, put strategy over technology. We work with a lot of clients who have kitchen sink their tech stack. They have all of the best pieces of technology across the stack itself, but they're not leveraging the best of that technology. If you start with strategy, if you start with an experience that you want to generate and then leverage those composable components, it means you get the best from each and every one of them. Your tech stack must connect data, enable distinct brand expression, support continuous experimentation, and evolve with the AI. Without this, all of the rules beforehand collapse. So those are our 5 rules. Orchestration beats management, enter the conversation, make storytelling infrastructure, network your portfolio, and put strategy over technology. PJ is going to take us through 3 examples now of brands that do that really well, 2 of which are our clients.
All right, the real world. So before we go back into complex multi-brand realities, I want to start with this one example of what good looks like when complexity is low. This is on running, Contentful client. I'm sure everybody here has heard about it. It's a pretty amazing story. They're a relatively young company, young brand, founded in Switzerland, and they've managed to scale globally in almost under a decade. Today, they're competing head to head with giants like Nike, Adidas, and Solomon, and they're winning meaningful share. And what I think makes On interesting is, in this masterclass and in this context, is not that they're a multi-brand company, because they're clearly not. What makes it interesting is that they can show us what clarity looks like when complexity is low. So think of On Running as a control case. What happens when brand meaning, storytelling, and product all line up perfectly from day one? So we're not here to copy On. We're here to understand what multi-brand organizations have to design for, because On does it naturally. They get it for free. So what On got right from the very beginning is that storytelling and product were never treated as separate things. Their origin story, running on clouds, that wasn't a campaign idea. It became the product. Cloud tech wasn't just one technical innovation. It was a name, a feeling, a metaphor, and a promise, everything at once. The same story shows up everywhere. It's how products are named, it's how they look, it's how they're described, it's how the brands talk about performance and movement. There isn't a marketing version of the story and a product version of the story. It's just one story. And I think that's what we mean when we say storytelling becomes infrastructure. It's not something you add on top. It is what everything else is almost built on. This level of clarity has very real effects. First, customers understand immediately what On is. They don't need explanations. They get what the brand is about, who it's for, and why it's different, right? Secondly, something interesting happens outside of the brand. partners, athletes, retailers, and media, they all resonate. They all tell the same story for them. Not because they were briefed perfectly, but because the story is simple enough to repeat. And thirdly, which matters in the context of everything we've talked about today, AI can understand them because it's clear. There's no ambiguity. When someone describes themselves as performance-driven, design-conscious, modern, On Running will surely show up in the conversation. Not because they hacked discovery, but because they're legible, they're easy to read, understand. Clarity compounds. So this is why that matters. What On Running gets for free is what multi-brand organizations have to design for. All right. So keep On in mind when we move into the next case, because the next examples are about what it takes to build and protect this level of clarity at scale. So we're moving again from clarity at low complexity to clarity at extremely high complexity. This is probably as complex as it gets. This is Lippert Inc. It's an American company. It's a Vaimo client. We've been working with them for a few years now. It's a pretty big beast. They operate a portfolio of more than 50 brands globally. They serve OEMs, dealers, and end consumers. They've got over almost 3,000 resellers worldwide. They have a very, very large, very diverse organizations behind the scenes, and they go and acquire a number of brands per year. So they keep growing like this. This is their model. Now, what's important here, it's not the size. It is that Lippert is not trying to force all of this into a single brand model. It's important. It's impossible. They're not pretending that one structure fits everything. They're intentionally running multiple multi-brand models at the same time. This is what multi-brand strategy looks like out in the real world. Not clean, not theoretical, but very deliberate. So when we look at their challenge, it was never the number of brands. The real risk was letting complexity become accidental. Because in a portfolio like this, not all brands should behave the same way. Some brands are hero brands, they need to stand alone. Some brands are less important, but should act as siblings and maybe have a visible parent. Some brands belong under the Lippert flagship as a clean sub-brand, right? So without clarity, this kind of setup quickly turns into fragmentation. That's when they came to us, and this is the first thing we did when we started working with them, clean this up. So clarity for customers, but also clarity internally for teams, platforms, and data. So the core question for Lippert wasn't which model is right. The core question for Lippert was which model belongs where. So what we're looking at here is what we did differently when we started working together. We made these decisions explicit. We didn't try to simplify the business. We worked hard to try to clarify it. We mapped their brands against different operating models, and we were very clear about brand roles and relationships. And behind the scenes, this was maybe the bigger lift, we designed a digital backbone. But important here, we didn't force every brand onto the same front end or the same platform. We actually allowed for multiple setups where it made most sense and where it created value. This is orchestration. No central control, not brand chaos, not platform unity. Because what we're looking at here is actually screenshots of brand sites, Lippert.com flagships, sub-brands, and a couple of other examples. These are actually run on a mix of Contentful, Shopify, Adobe Commerce, and a ton of other boxes in the tech stack. So Lippert is about coordinating meaning, data, and experience without flattening the brands. And why this matters here is Lippert proves something really important. You don't have to choose a single multi-brand model, but you have to know which models you're running and why. And you have to design and be very deliberate for that reality. And this is where AI comes in again, because AI doesn't care about your org chart. It doesn't care which teams own and operate which brand. It only sees signals. And if those signals are inconsistent or accidental, confusion will scale. And Lippert works because complexity is deliberate here. Brand roles are clear, relationships are intentional, and orchestration replaces accidents and guesswork. So if On Running showed us what clarity unlocks, Lippert, I think, shows us how to scale clarity without losing control. All right, last case. the last thing I want to bring to the table today is PPG. This is another giant organization. I think the PPG comes from Pittsburgh plate glass. I think they were originally, it was a glass company. These days it's about coatings and paints. PPG is a global multi-brand B2B and B2C organization operating across many markets, brands, and customer size. You see a couple of their paint buckets here. They also have 50 plus brands in various industries and spaces. And what I think is making PPG interest in today's context is not what they built. We haven't even gotten there yet. It's where they chose to start. They didn't come to Vaimo asking for a new platform. They didn't come to Vaimo asking for a set of AI features and proof of concepts. They came to us with a very fundamental question. What should a modern, best-in-class B2B experience look like for PPG? And how should it scale across brands and markets? So PPG is a strategy-first story. And that distinction is very, very important, I think. Now, their challenge, like many organizations, they have a digital ecosystem that had grown out of control, unevenly and just wild. Different markets, different brands, different levels of maturity, different ways of operating in across markets. From the outside, this shows up as extremely inconsistent all across the board. But internally, it created a much bigger problem, because without a shared vision, every decision internally becomes a debate. Given brand wants to do it in one way in one market and in one country, the second country, they're running their own thing. Maybe they have a separate site. They want to do it differently. So platform decisions, investment priorities, what should be standardized, what should be shared across markets and brands, and what could be localized. Where can someone run free and do whatever they feel like doing today? So the risk here isn't, we haven't even gotten to the risk of choosing the wrong technology. The risk here is optimizing different parts of the organization in different directions. And PPG realized this. They realized that without alignment, complexity is what will be accelerated. So the approach here, they made a very deliberate decision. They just said, let's just ignore technical development. Let's ignore execution. Instead of jumping into platform selection or those kind of things or those kind of questions, they started with investing in something they call the North Star for their B2B digital experience. Not for one brand, not for one market, but a shared experience model that could scale across brands, regions, and operating models. And this might sound a little bit lofty, but actually, we did this last year with them. We worked with many teams across multiple markets to align on customer needs, defining the customer, who are they, where are they coming from, and what is it they need PPG for? How do end-to-end customer journeys look like? And is there a central customer journey for each main use case that should just be shared across every single PPG touch point, regardless of market or brand? What are some experience principles, and what does good actually look like? This was the very first thing we did with them. Then it wasn't about designing screens. It was about designing decisions, is what I would like to call it. So I think PPG is a clear example of Rule 5. Technology follows strategy. They understood that AI data platforms can only scale what already exists. If meaning is fragmented, technology will just amplify that. If clarity is shared, technology actually can become a multiplier. So by aligning that first, PPG reduced risk. They created a language across teams, and they gave themselves the ability to scale with confidence rather than more about react under pressure, one could say. So that's the last case. I want to step back and get a bit practical with Adam in the last leg here for today.
So we wanted to give you an approach that you could use yourself, and we've boiled down the lessons that we've learned from working with Lippert and with PPG into a 100-day plan that you could take away and use yourself. The point of this plan is that you should be able to say 100 days from now, what is the structure around our multi-brand model and which are we operating? We know which brands we should connect and which we shouldn't. We have a shared language for brand meaning and a clear AI readiness gap that we are aligned around how we fill. And in order to deliver this, we move from insight through to intent and through to action. This approach removes ambiguity from your brands, your portfolio, and how you want to win in an AI-driven world. What it will give you is clarity over your multi-brand model, alignment across your leadership, and a foundation that AI can actually understand. So it equips you for the future of LLM-based product search. Essentially, it's aligned to the rules that we talked about. You start by creating orchestration and removing silos through a multi-brand strategy. You create collaboration across your brand teams, connecting them around strategy development, and you defined your brand structure and hierarchy where necessary. Most appropriately, though, you come away from this naming and communicating your model clearly. Then you enter the conversation. You do a geo audit and strategy, understand where those LLM content gaps that PJ was talking about exist. You prioritize areas of poor performance, and you decide whether and how you want customers to move between brands. And you come away from that with an understanding of the challenge that you face, one that you fill with a content and experience North Star. This is designed to make storytelling that infrastructure that we've spoken about so far. You design LLM earned and owned journeys that allow people to exist in any of those environments and not move beyond them or to transition between them. You create performant content structures and frameworks that allow you to perform well. And those content structures exist within Contentful or your PIM and or both. You deliver clear roadmaps for content production and generation. And essentially what you do is you audit your brand meaning and how it manifests across all of those channels. So you make sure that you have distinction and disambiguation between your brands, differentiation and disambiguation, too many Ds. Then you move to create your group play. You network your portfolio. You do a shared services review. You align measurement, you connect data, and most importantly, you share insight between your brands, assigning ownership to orchestration and those shared services to make sure you make the most of your group structure. Then you put strategy over technology, optimizing your technical roadmap, looking at the composable stack that you've got, looking at each element of that and the functionality within that you are using to make sure that you're using it effectively to deliver relevance to every user, wherever they're looking at your products. You deliver long-term answers to customer questions and brand differentiation so that you are future-proof. That's the plan. It's designed to put you ahead of everyone else. The organizations who win are not the fastest builders. They're the ones who create clarity. Creating clarity, though, is one of those things that takes time. So thank you for your time today. Those were the new rules of multi-brand strategy. The shift, what we've taken you through is the shift in customer behavior, one that means that brands matter more than ever, but the path to finding them has completely changed. The opportunity that you have to create a more effective LLM optimized brand portfolio, and the approach to distilling, differentiating, and dovetailing that brand DNA through the 5 rules that we've talked about. We've been Vaimo and Contentful. If you have any questions, then now is the time to ask them. We have a few minutes left.
Good stuff. So for those of you who see the sidebar, there's a question button over there, and feel free to hit the post question and fire away. We'll see what we can get through, if anything. There's also a chat option, I think. Looks like someone is typing there. Let's see if see what comes up.
I always think it would be better if people could just talk at this point, don't you?
Yeah. All right. Claire, thank you for that comment. Hopefully this was valuable. So Elizabeth writes, advice on storytelling. What works in the age of AI? Should stories be detailed, go beyond superficial, surface examples, marketing language? Broad question. Raphael, you see it? I think this is more a contentful type topic, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think, well, of course, what we said about being relevant is a lot on consistency, but also how you can avoid to just repeat what is already out there, right? Like how you can bring your own meaning, your own strategy and intent into that. That's how then in Contentful we can model, but it doesn't AI will not create a story for you. AI can accelerate and help, but you need to have that story already. I think that's the main takeaway. BJ, Adam, do you agree or do you see it differently?
I completely agree. But just to build on it a little, there's often a gap with many products in terms of the way that those products are described and the stories that are told on the website, which often, particularly in the case of products like fragrance, have a very distinct and very nuanced language associated with them. And there's a gap between the content that exists today and the content that would be needed for an LLM in order for it to be able to create that distinction and to describe in layperson's terms exactly what that product does. So from a storytelling point of view, it's important that you create an approach that traverses all of those touch points, as I say, creating a distinct role for each touch point and providing content and information that is aligned to the level of comparison and the type of searches and the type of answers that are going to be explored in that. Because inevitably within social or earned media or within owned media, those narratives are slightly different compared to the comparisons that are going to, the questions that are going to be asked within an LLM. Hope that answers your question, at least in a shallow level of depth.
And then also where personalization comes in, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
You need to meet where they are with the message that will deliver the most valuable information to them.
How about the role of brand in highly commoditized businesses in the times of AI? Assuming future, many B2B commodity businesses use AI to purchase. I think my gut is telling me that the role of brand couldn't be more important, particularly when if you are selling a B2B commodity, you need to create something around which an AI or an LLM is going to be able to differentiate you from everyone else. And so your brand values need to be evoked, and what makes you different from the competition needs to be evoked really, really simply and really, really clearly, and probably really, really functionally. But I'm going off the top of my head at this point.
Yeah. One of the things that we sometimes talk about in a kind of high competition type spaces I'm looking at my own kids when they go shopping and how they talk to their machines, and they will say something like, I'm after a new outfit, but I don't want anything from China, or I don't want child labor, or I can wait for a few more days. I don't want any. I want real quality. I want something that's sustainable or responsibly sourced, and these kind of things. Those are things that you can also add to your brand. These kind of like shipping and sourcing preferences are suddenly coming into play, because that's not what you Google for. No one would Google for, I need a new outfit for next week, and I want it to be responsibly sourced, or I want it to, not break the planet as much. But this is something that you might have already been speaking about. This could be already part of the graph that the AI has on you. It knows that PJ likes, these kind of brands and dislikes those kind of industries or businesses or even values. I think that's one thing you can also do in commoditized or high competition spaces, try to charge your brand or get a bit of that into your DNA that you might that might be the kind of preference set that customers might convey easily when they're just talking.
Yeah. Claire, how do you see supporting brands that have both? How do you see this supporting brands that have to both exist in the digital and physical retail spaces? How can AI be used to support moving between those boundaries without losing insights and disrupting the customer experience? We've done work on this. So one client we work with, can I say Elon? I have now, and I'll apologize if it's not appropriate, but we've worked with them to support sales staff in stores so that they have a very detailed understanding of all of the white goods they have across their store. So you can create consistency between different salespeople with different levels of expertise, and you can also create consistency in the terms of the way they talk about those products, not just about the information that they give. Yeah. Beyond that, we've also looked at how, doing the reverse, you might work with a fragrance client, for example, and look at how they sell those fragrances in store. So, for example, they are trained across the group in terms of moving from the occasion that someone might be using fragrance for to their more emotional memories that they might be using fragrance to evoke. And we work with them to codify the way that sales process works in store in an LLM, so that your presence within an LLM actually reflects what happens in store, and that you can create an experience online in their own spaces that is much more evocative of the experience in store. So you bring those two areas in line. But inevitably, again, in that environment, their sales staff can and do need to be brought together, and it can be used to inform that sales process, because inevitably one of the things they start with is, what fragrances do you wear today, or what fragrances do you like? And they can't possibly know the thousands of fragrances that exist out there.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to add to that question, like how physical and digital and what AI can do. There's what we're in right now is, I think we're somewhere in the middle of AI slop, the AI slop phase, where as a user, I see something on screen and I can't trust it to be real. The web and all our social medias and everything is just swamped with synthetic content. So one thing that we are coaching our brands that have a physical presence is to really leverage the physical channel and emphasize the sense of being real, because that's something that users will increasingly go look for. Like, is this a real thing? Is this a synthetic photo? Is this actually a real physical brick and mortar location? Does this brand or does this store even exist? So I think leveraging something that's tangible and real is going to be a competitive advantage, and especially now in the age of AI slop and synthetic media.
Yeah, exactly. I think as the human skills are more valuable than ever, creativity, right? This is what AI cannot reproduce or cannot. That's where we need to invest all on.
We're hoping. All right. Good stuff. I think we're running out of time. So yes, thank you.
I think so.
Should we call it a day?
We're going to call it a day. Thank you all. Really, thank you for your time. Oh, sorry. Do you see any difference in the European and US market, how they market their brands? That's a very big question. Yes, it's the answer to that. There is, as far as I mean,
the one thing that we've been observing, and Adam and I have been discussing, is Nike, and how Nike is clearly a sibling to commerce in Jordan in the US. But if you go to Nike.com in many of the European countries, there's no commerce, or definitely not Jordan. Basketball is not a thing, or not as an important and big thing in Europe compared to the US. So there's a couple of differences there that could be fun to just poke around and see how the big brands and groups are doing things differently. There's got to be a reason why Nike is kind of cross-pollinating these brands in the US, but not in Europe. But that's just one observation that we made recently.
So I've now thought of a good example of this, right? So we did some work last year for JD Sport. One of the challenges that they've had is that they've grown massively internationally and bought a chain over in the US. And there's really sort of simple things that they had to do, which was to kind of go from king of trainers to something new, forever forward for them, because no one knew what trainers were in the US. But broadly, they also have moved away from a very monolith approach that looked at how you position JD Sport in one single way, to actually trying to nuance and flex the way that they express their brand, so that it sits at the heart of communities, of urban communities across the world. So Australia is different to the US, is different to the UK, because people who are into streetwear are very different in each of those environments. And I appreciate how idiotic it seems that I'm talking about this kind of thing, but it was a really interesting project to work on. Any good examples of multi-brand strategy from the FMCG sector? It's a difficult one, right? We don't really work with because we do e-commerce and we're looking to convert sales online. We don't work with a lot of FMCG brands direct, so I wouldn't want to step into that at this point. Sorry, Jakob. That's tricky.
I think we're coming up on top of the hour, and we got to cut. But anyone with more questions, feel free to reach out to Vaimo or Contentful, Vaimo.com or Contentful.com. There's clear contact us button, so don't be a stranger. Hit it up, and then let's continue the conversation there.
So apparently I have to wrap it up by mentioning that we'll share the recording, slide deck and Q&A to everyone. And if you have any more questions, you're welcome to reach out at vaimo.com/contact. That's vaimo.com/contact. Okay. Thank you very much for your time once more. Have a great day.
Thank you.